Good evening, everybody, and welcome to some more stat check bonus content. Today, we are going to be going through Grotmas. I'm going to call it week two, but week two with an asterisk because I'm coming out a couple of days later because I was at a tournament this weekend. I didn't have time to get to all of them on Sunday. And then on Monday, when I was planning on recording, they dropped 4 detachments on me, meaning that I didn't have time to do that either. So we're coming to you on Tuesday, the 17th of December. That means we have day 9 to 17 of Grotmas for you all. I'll be going through I think it ends up being like 13 detachments that I have to run through for you all today. So we'll be going at a reasonable pace. We'll be kind of following the same format as last week, which is to say we'll be doing kind of a general overview of why the detachment is interesting, what you might see from it, and kind of any limitations it's got, and then kind of going through some of the units that will be good in that detachment and that you will probably see on the tabletop, and then running it out with a sample list for each one. As with all things, these sample lists are very much a first pass at these. They are intended to give you a starting point for you to go in if you want to go and play a game with the detachment with something that's kind of got some capacity to play the game, has some mission play assets and some good things, and I'll kind of talk through any interesting combos and things like that to go into them. They're all generally built with the intention of taking something that was already fairly playable within the realm of the faction and then adapting it to the detachment rather than being, hey, let's build from the ground up for this detachment, with a couple of exceptions. There are a few that are a little more like that. But generally, it's, hey, let's do our best to earnestly engage with what this detachment is telling us to do, but we'll keep it to the units that are, within the realm of playable as much as we can. There are a couple that are a little more out there, a couple that are that are a little less out there because as is the way of things. And then we'll be going through all of them and we'll be looking at our um, framework, which I've done a small update to. So we're going to roll into that now. If you're enjoying the content, you can go back and watch week 1 to or week 1, so 1 to 8 in the previous video, which you should be able to find on the YouTube channel. Otherwise, please enjoy, and I'll do all the plugs later because I've not earned them yet, as far as I'm concerned. All right, so to start off, we have a quick recap on last week and my new categories that I've added them all for. I basically went through and decided to give each category or each quadrant of it a sort of name so that you've got a better picture and I can kind of refer to them as such. So at the top left, for the interesting but low power attachments, I have fun but flawed. These are attachments that you can put on the table. They're going to be interesting. They've got some cool things that they can do, but they're either fundamentally lacking power or options to play the game with, and will struggle to convert at the tournament level. We've got the top right, which is powerful and compelling, which is interesting detachments with the ability to play the tournament, play a game, and feel like you have interesting options and agency in the gameplay and agency in list building as well is another key part of that. You'll not see all of them, and those are a lot of the delineation between sort of like the bottom of that category and the top right. So like Star Shatter is a much more flexible and compelling attachment than Lion's Blade is, despite the fact that I think Lion's Blade is quite cool. It still makes the cut for, I would consider playing this for a tournament, but it's not Star Shatter. And then we have Who Is This For, which is our bottom left quadrant for low power and less interesting detachments. These are attachments that are both not really doing anything interesting and not bringing any power level, right? We could have a really boring detachment that's really strong, that's just the best stratagem for each of the marine detachments and the best enhancements, and it would be really boring and it'd be the same thing, but it'd still be really good, right? That would go into same auctions, new packaging. Whereas this is for things where you look at it and you're like, but this is just not doing anything that I want. And Hex Warp Thralls Thrallband is going to be our example here. It's a detachment that does a bunch of things that Thousand Suns already do or don't need, and adds some interesting options, but not really. Just it doesn't give you a ton to play with, right? And it's got some power there, but it's all power that you have access to already, or it doesn't compare well to the power that already exists for that faction. And then, same options, new packaging. I have Tyranids as our example for this one so far, because the Tyranid attachment really does feel like it's just you play the same data sheets you were already playing in Tyranids, and it's okay, right? You can make some things a little bit better than they were otherwise. Some things get a little bit worse, but mostly you're just doing the same thing you always were. So as we go, we'll be putting our armies into these brand new spanking boxes. Okay, so first up, we have Iconoclast Fiefdom, which is the Chaos Knights detachment. Broadly, this is the detachment is going to give you access to a few things. The main thing being you gain the ability to bring Chaos Space Marine Cultist units. For me, that mostly means you get to bring Chaos Cultists, called the Cultist Mob detachment. There are a couple of other interesting things like the Chaos Firebrand or a Curse Cultist and things like that. But mostly, if you're playing Chaos Knights, you're doing it for Chaos Knight damage output. and getting access to sustained hits on your Chaos Knights or lethal hits on your Chaos Knights is a pretty compelling thing to have. It does good for ramping your damage output. Chaos Knights are definitely an army that can spend CP for damage output in its traditional attachment. You have the sustained hits stratagem, which is pretty solid, but having access to just sustained hits all the time or lethal hits all the time is genuinely quite compelling. You get access to some really good chaff units as well with Chaos Cultists. Cultists have sticky objective naturally and their battle line, which helps with just like the battle line overload. If you play a mission like Raise Banners, you can definitely have a lot of like ability to score that with Chaos Cults. And yeah, sticky objective means that you've got a lot of ability to like threaten to walk into an objective. You can bring cultists back as well. So you've got like some pretty good options for just having boots on the ground in Chaos Spaceman or Chaos Knights from the Chaos Spaceman stuff, which isn't super common. There's also an advance and charge stratagem, which is really good for things like the Knight Rampager, who does have that once per game, but would really appreciate having it later. Carnivores as well. You don't have access to Knights of Shade in this tavern to go through walls, but having advance and charge and fall back and charge and fall back and shoot as well means that things like brigands and despoilers, those kind of things that can be a little vulnerable to getting bogged down or would really appreciate the extra reach can really benefit from that, especially if you're playing on like Games Workshop style terrain with the low ruins that you can walk over. Carnivores with the advance and charge go much further than carnivores with Knights and Shade if you can just walk over the terrain anyway. There's also a few stratagems in here that are not super amazing. Like there's a reactive move, which is fine for protecting a knight from some combat stuff. You've got firing into combat if somebody tagged your damned unit, which is again, it's fine, but it's not the most important thing in the world. The lack of rotate iron shields or diabolic bulwark, I think it's called for Chaos Knights, is probably the biggest issue with this attachment. You don't have the 4 invulnerable save, which does encourage me towards things like Knight Lancers that already have a 4 invulnerable save. I cannot recall off the top of my head what would do for the attachment, but we'll talk about that in a second. You've got access to Scout through Pave the Way, which is pretty good. Being able to get your cultists up the board onto objectives and start threatening to sticky them early is genuinely quite good. In Search and Destroy deployment, for example, you can sticky the middle objective with a Chaos Cultist unit on turn 1, then run it backwards, get it to safety. So yeah, I think there's some really interesting things in here. And then, you get rural ones to hit and wound from your Titanic Chaos Knights, which is not a thing you're really worrying about. If you were going to play a Crush Cultist, it would maybe help out, but not the direction I liked for here. So as far as the list goes, yeah, here we have kind of where I went for Chaos Knights. We have a Chaos Thrust and Knight Lancer. It already has a 4 invulnerable save, so it's not all that upset about having the lack of the stratagem, giving it advance and charge really good on a Lancer. It's not the fastest knight in the world, and being able to just go like it's already quite fast, being I think base movement 12, which gives it the ability to just kind of like be very explosive damage output. You can then chuck on sustained hits to help it carve through like smaller things that it would normally have a bit more problems with, and then maintaining that 4 invulnerable save. We have 2 squads of 20 Chaos Cultists, 2 squads of 10, backfield objective holders, midfield objective holders, soak up those mortal wounds, keep your brigands and your carnivores, 4 of each, really just doing their damage. And then 1 squad of Nurglings just for some aggressive pressure to stop people from pinning you in your deployment zone, giving you some ability to play the game, or just screening your backfield or whatever. 40 points doesn't buy a ton. You could probably squeeze that into being another cultist mob and not be too upset with it. But I do like having a bit of scout, a bit of infiltrate, especially when you've got two scouting squads of cultists. It's nice to be able to block people from infiltrate blocking you, so that you can get them on the board, get onto sticky objective on the middle, or anything like that. So yeah, overall, I think Iconoclast for me, where do I have it landing? Yeah, down here in Fun But Flawed. It's an interesting army. It gives you some cool options, right? You can bring chaos cultists and do all those kind of things, but none of it really feels better than Knights of Shade with the new change to from the Balanced Data Slate to Doom and Darkness for the regular Knights attachment. Like it's easier to access your battle line debuff abilities, which helps your knights stay alive a little longer, right? Like this is very much a attachment of you are killing your own stuff and your opponent's killing you, and you don't really have a ton of ways to like really keep yourself going. Chaos Knights are very much a patient army of sit, wait, use your high OC to bully objectives and score points. And this detachment encourages you to playing a bit more of an all-in style because you kind of need to be getting the damage output out from your war dogs to be getting the most out of it, but not having a 4 invulnerable save makes it harder for you to keep your primary alive. Not having Knights of Shade, right? Being able to walk 4 Chaos Knights through a wall in a turn is much better than having 1 that can walk through walls, or 1 that can advance and charge instead of 4 that can walk through walls. So overall, I think it's kind of interesting. Like adding damned units does open up a new dimension for Chaos Knights. I just don't think it's especially powerful. So I have it here. So 3 out of 5 for interest, 2 out of 5 for power, which is it's fine. It's nothing crazy. I'm perfectly okay with it as an attachment. Okay, next up we have the Questor Forge Pact for Imperial Knights. So this basically gives you access to Adeptus Mechanicus detachments, Adeptus Mechanicus units. Unfortunately, quite a restrictive range of them. You don't get access to any of the really interesting ones like Cerberus Raiders or Taxi or Skystalker, Taxi Skystalkers or um, Skitari Infiltrators, anything like that. Right? Any of the stuff you'd want, you basically get Skitari Vanguard Rangers and then a few characters. You get real ones to hit, and then if you're near, you heal a wound, and then if you're near a tech breach model, you heal D3 on one of them, which is fine. It's nice to have a little bit of additional healing for Imperial Knights. Just keeps you topped up. Unfortunately, the 6-up Feel No Pain is the detachment rule for the household detachment for Imperial Knights. You will maintain the free rerolls or the +2 advance and charge from the army rule, but the Feel No Pain and the then 5-up Feel No Pain when you become honored is locked to the detachment, so you will be a little bit less durable on the front end. And then again, this detachment doesn't have access to the Feel No Pain stratagem, so again, you'll be a little less durable on the back end as well. So keeping yourself topped up with some healing, D3 wounds for one of them. You can or for all of them, if you can keep them next to your tech priest, if you're bringing one, can definitely keep them topped up. There's some interesting enhancements. We've got like a 4+4 wounds, which is probably the most interesting one. There's also a heal an additional 2 wounds and get lone operative for a tech priest, which is again quite solid if you're going to be wandering him around behind, healing D3 wounds on 2 or 3 knights, and then also healing an additional 2 on one of them. Does mean that if you're not going down, it will be quite frustrating because you'll just keep going back up. As far as stratagems go, the most interesting one here is probably the assault stratagem. It just helps with getting the big knights around the board. Since they lost access to bondsman abilities, you used to see some things where you could advance and charge the big knights, but now they're very much honest about where they are. With Titanic, it does mean they're quite mobile and able to like threaten quite a lot of shooting lanes on most boards. Um, Other than that, the only other really interesting thing here is you have the ability to overwatch with a single gun on a big knight now. The most compelling option for me here is either Canis Rex's big gun, which has sustained hits and can be generally quite threatening, especially since you can do it for free, and also the Knight Valiant's big flamer, which is what I decided to build around for the light detachment. Genuinely, overwatching with a big knight is quite powerful. It's not going to be insane, but with the amount of line of sight of bullshittery that towering provides, and then the power of some of the Imperial Knight's big guns, it does genuinely threaten some things that you would have maybe had trouble with otherwise. So if we kind of go into the list here, I have gone for Canis Rex, a Knight Valiant with Omniscient Champion, which is the +4 wounds, a Tech Priest Manipulators with Magus Custoris. I think he was just cheaper than the alternative option. A 1 Armored Cavalry, 3 Armored Warglaives, 2 squads of Skitari Rangers for Scout and Sticky Objective, 1 squad of Skitari Vanguard for some OC, for some messing with OC on your opponent, and then 1 Calidus Assassin to, kind of shut your opponent's offensive stratagems down. And yeah, so here we have a 30 wound, I think it's 26 wounds on base, 30 wound healing Knight Valiant that can overwatch. It just seemed like the kind of thing that was like, if you're going to play this attachment, this seems like the kind of obnoxious thing that it's worth trying to do. And then, yeah, Canis Rex potentially chucking out free overwatches and still doing all of your good generic stratagems while you add a decent scoring package in your backfield with 2 OC from Rangers and Vanguard. Again, Scout and Sticky is a good combination. And all those kind of things for the generic um, Imperial Knights. So again, I don't think it's necessarily particularly better than the base detachment. Losing access to the Feel of Pain is not altogether that appealing. It does make the army much harder to use, and then some of the stratagems in the base book are quite good. But Imperial Knights are also not an army that's like particularly incredible, and I don't think you're losing out on a ton by playing this detachment. It's definitely like you lose out on some stuff, right? Like there is no, by no means are you doing exactly the same amount. Like you don't have access to the +1 strength +1 AP stratagem for Armigers. You don't have fight on death for Canis Rex, which is a real downside. So I don't think this attachment is particularly incredible. I think it's got some real limitations, but this is kind of where I would be looking at starting if I was like going to have to play it. And these units are compellingly better than most Imperial Agents options. Subductors are slightly more expensive and don't come with as many generally good rules, and they're probably the most interesting like alternative thing that you could be putting in this slot. So yeah, I have them kind of here. Same sort of level as Chaos Knights. I think they are, it's interesting. It's not quite as powerful. I think the baseline data sheets you're getting access to just aren't as good as Chaos Cultists. Not having the reanimation stratagem and buffing like durability, but in a way where you have to be alive to get the durability buff is the weakest version of durability. Like healing is the least. It's possibly the most frustrating, but it's the least effective version of additional durability. Right? Like effectively, you're basically saying +5 wounds, but I've got to work for getting it right? You've got to stay alive, stay alive for turn and have taken damage, and it just adds a whole bunch of like annoyance to keeping your stuff alive at the rate that you're hoping for with an army like knights. Okay, next up we have a Warpbane Task Force for the Grey Knights, which is one of the most interesting attachments for me. I'm a really big fan of this one. So for this one, you're getting reroll once to hit army-wide, and then reroll all hits if you manage to complete the objective mini game of holding half the objectives in no man's land. You have full rules in your deployment as always, and you also get within 6 of purifiers as in hallowed ground, so you gain access to full rules to hit. There's also a bunch of stratagems that trigger off of it, like 6-inch deep strike and reactive mortal wounds, which is quite solid. But yeah, it's nice to have a granite detachment that's a little less stratagem dependent, which I think is the big thing. I'm very, very prone for making fun of Grey Knight players for being like, yeah, so all I have to do is Halo and so far this unit, and then Mr. Daemons here, and Rapid Ingress over there, and then I'll, reroll this charge, and then I'll do dev wounds. I'm like, well, that's 7 command points, and it's turn 2. So you're not going to do all of that. You get to pick and choose some of it. You're also planning on grenading with those Terminators on the way down and 6-inch deep strike. So this detachment gives you a much more front-facing, hey, it's just good data sheets doing good things, and then it improves their damage output for an army that is generally fairly lacking in damage output. It's not an army that is known for tabling people, right? There are definitely situations where you can. It's got fairly good anti-infantry firepower, but by and large, I would say Grey Knights are one of the lower end damage armies in the game, and this does make them less strategy dependent and increase their output. So it kind of addresses 2 of the flaws. Now, obviously, you lose out on a bunch of the defensive technology. You don't have Mr. Deimos, you don't have Sigil of Exigence to give you reactive abilities to screw with your opponent's movement and shooting, and then you don't have Armor of Contempt, which, while it did get nerfed, is still very good for 2-up armor save units, especially things like Nemesis Dread Knights. But in return, you are again gaining the damage. But there was also a really this detachment has the Reaper of Obliterax, which is to say it has an enhancement that gives you +1 mortal wound whenever you deal a wound, not devastating wounds, just deal an additional mortal, which means that you're capable of killing multiple models with it or overspilling damage. And then it also gives you precision. Now there is a limitation on it that you have to be in hallowed ground, but it's not that difficult. And there are some characters that really like that, which we'll touch on in the list. So yeah, but yeah, for me, it's the Brotherhood Tech Marine. The guy has 8 attacks for some reason. He has the servo harness, so he has 2 plasma attacks, 2 servo armor attacks, and then 4 regular attacks, which means that he gets 8 attempts at getting those additional wound rolls. He'll have full rerolls to hit if he's in combat because you have to be in hallowed ground to have the mortal wounds. So he's 3 rerolling, and then strength 6 and strength 8 on all of his attacks with multi damage and access to a reroll once to wound stratagem. The man rips through 10-man squads of guys, 5-man squads of Space Marines like they're not there. It's very, very funny, and it's an insane amount of damage output to give to a Green Army that doesn't typically have that. And then with access to things like 6-inch deep strike and shark for infantry models, it's genuinely really, really good. Nemesis Dread Knights of both stripes, Grey Knight Grandmasters, and the regular ones, both really benefit from full rerolls, both in combat where they are generally fairly efficient, but do struggle from that 3s to hit on the hammer or 2s to hit with low AP on the sword. It's nice to just have the ability to always, for the Grandmaster or whatever, for the sword to be able to sweep and have 10 attacks hitting on 2s to get through small things, or for the big attack to go for the sword and pretty reliably hit even when you're outside of hallowed with 2s rolling 1s, and then for the hammer going from 3s to hit to 3s rolling 1s or 3s full rerolls just means that you're much more consistently going to be getting 4 or 5 wound rolls against bigger targets with Dread Knights, which is one of their biggest foibles. Losing the 6-inch auto advance is pretty rough for Dread Knights, but you're still getting a lot of distance out of them most of the time. And if you play around like a 2, if you assume a 2 or a 3, they're still pretty good on being on board. And then with the army rule being the teleportation every turn, you can still almost always get your Dread Knights where you need them to be. And the heavy side cannon with full rerolls is a absolutely insane gun. Purifiers and Castle and Crow are the other standout here. They gain additional benefit from a lot of the stratagems. There's a reroll once to wound stratagem that gives you full rerolls if you use it on Castle and Crow, which is pretty good for having that unit just really, really punch up damage wise. It's got good shooting, it's got good anti-infantry. I don't think it's essential to the builds. I think you're probably going to see 2 squads of 5 Purifiers at least in most builds, and then you may choose to upgrade 1 to Crow if your metagame demands it, or the metagame demands it, not necessarily just yours. But I don't think they're essential. They're in the list that I'm going to talk through in a second. But yeah, having access to a form of automation stratagem is almost as good as Armor of Contempt for this unit. If it's in cover, most of the stuff that's shooting at you, getting a 4 save against it is going to make it not be quite as terrifying. And then having, your 30 attacks, 40 attacks in shooting, and then in combat as well with damage 2 with full wound rerolls and full hit rerolls, they're always in their own aura. It's impossible not to be. Really does keep this unit just doing a very good job for sub 350 points with Crow and the Purifiers. I'm a reasonably big fan of it. I don't think it's the best, it's not certainly not an essential take, but it is pretty good. Just getting that +1 attack on purifiers. Yeah, purifiers being 3 attack space in combat, and then having 2 Stormbolter shots each, which then goes to 4, and then one purifying flame shot, which goes to 2. Like that unit can have 60 shots with full wound rerolls, and full hit rerolls, right? Like that is a genuinely insane amount of infantry shredding firepower. But the question kind of becomes: does the army need more infantry shredding? I think we'll get a feel for that over time. So here's an example list that I put together for Warpbane Task Force, which is 2 Grandmasters in Nemesis Dread Knight. One has Paragon of Sanctity, which is point click you're in Halo, which is really good for the Brotherhood champion to just make sure he's always connecting. Brotherhood Technique, making sure he's just always doing his damage. Grey Knight with the Mandulian apologies. Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight with Mandulian Reliquary for 7 OC. 2 Brotherhood Librarians just for some vehicle killing damage, just to make sure that if you're faced up against like a Doomsday Arc or a Telamon Dreadnought or anything like that, you can just make sure it doesn't completely scam you with toughness 11 or -1 to wound or anything like that. Just making sure you're keeping your damage high and giving you some good teleport scoring options. Castle and Crow and Brotherhood Tech Marine, as discussed before. A 10 of Purifiers to take Crow with. 5 Purifiers for they're basically an Aura Caddy. They'll be a scoring unit. They're 2 up save. They'll sit behind a wall. They'll chuck rerolls onto your Dread Knights and just keep you ticking along for maximum damage output. 5 strikes, again, Scout and Sticky is a really good combination. I don't know if anybody's noticed that in the game at all, but Scout, Sticky, and Teleportation, and then 3 Nemesis Dread Knights. I would say, in general, I would assume baseline that you'll arm all 5 Dread Knights with the Heavy Flamer, the Heavy Incinerator, and the Heavy Psy Cannon, and the Nemesis Demon Hammer, but feel free to change that up a little bit. I'm trialing a few other things here with the Silencer on the Grandmasters and the Sword on the Grandmasters, but I think the baseline would be play Psy Cannon, Incinerator, and Great Hammer, and then kind of go from there. There is definitely a world where I could see you wanting to change those depending on the things you're dealing with. The sword having super attacks is pretty good. Hitting on 2 rolling ones if you're going to be leaving the aura, and the Grandmasters have the full wound rerolls against vehicles of monsters to push that strength 10 up to wounding on 4s or 5s with full rerolls, which is not as big a deal. Where the hammer, going from 3s to 3s rerolling is good, but not necessarily essential. Yeah, big fan of Warpbane Task Force, and that results in me putting it up here. I have it being about as good as Star Shatter. I don't think it's as interesting. Part of that is just to kind of come back to Grey Knights don't have a ton of data sheets, which means that when I put this list together, I'm like, oh wow, it's great. It's Nemesis Dread Knight spam, the same as we were playing in Teleport Strike Force for months, right? Like it's not particularly novel. It's got new ways of interacting, and I don't think it's like boring. The fact that it introduces Crow as like a really, really interesting damage output unit, and it does have you interacting with objectives on the board a little more, and it does make you play a little more honest. But I don't think it doesn't like create a whole bunch of new compelling gameplay approaches. It just kind of gives you, here is full rerolls dreadnoughts, and you can go and kill things, and then here's some like cool tech pieces to kind of close the door. Which I think is cool and I think it's interesting, but the stratagem suite is not the most compelling. 6 deep strike into charge with infantry is fine. You could definitely look at things like Drago with Terminators for a 3-inch charge from deep strike, right? That's totally a thing you could do. But that unit already has a 6-inch charge from deep strike. Like, did you really need the help? So yeah, for me, it kind of lands in the interesting, but I'm not like blown away by it. Like it seems powerful, but I don't think it's especially like I'm not looking at it being like, oh man, this is a whole brand new way to play Grey Knights, right? It's another way to play the same Grey Knights we've already been playing. Yeah, maybe it should be down here, but I'm gonna be bored. I'm gonna say that it's got enough novelty that I'm happy that it's compelling. Happy to say it's compelling, just not completely novel. Okay, next up we have Librarius Conclave for the Space Marines. This basically gives you the ability to choose between 5 different buffs. You have +2 move for your once to hit and wound, +1 AP at range attacks within 12. Just a bunch of really, really solid and interesting options that you get to pick one of a turn. One of the more interesting things here, it is battle round selected, so your opponent doesn't know what you've picked. If you are going second, your opponent will know what you picked going into your turn, which is good in some ways because there's one that's -1 strength to incoming attacks. But then it's less interesting from the sense that if you pick +2 to move, your opponent knows that you're going to have access to that and that you're able to increase your threat range quite significantly. It's only for units that have attached psychers, which is it does limit the army quite a lot. Like psychers are okay for Space Marines. There are definitely some good options. You've got the Librarian Phobos armor, who's quite good with infiltrators. You've got the regular Librarian who can join quite a range of things. You've got Mephiston, Ezekiel, and Tigurius, who can all join some slightly more interesting things than the regular ones, or Mephiston, who's just kind of a beat stick on his own. So generally, you've kind of got some cool direction for that, and the units that you can buff are pretty good. The enhancements are insane. I really, really think that they are the most compelling part of the detachment for me. The main ones that stand out are the anti-vehicle, anti-monster 4+, or anti-vehicle, anti-monster 5+ enhancement that then gives you an additional buff like sustained hits or +6 range. There's the advance and charge one that then also gives you fallback and charge if you're in the right if you're in the right psychic discipline, and then loan up 18 if you want it, and then ignore Overwatch, which is also pretty damn good. The stratagems are quite good. You've got grenade stratagem with 18-inch range from Psychers. You've got +1 strength, +2 strength in the right situations, which can be as good as, or if not better than Lance under the right circumstances. You've got a -1 to hit stratagem that also gives your opponent hazardous in combat if you're in the right discipline. You've got armor of contempt. Like, it just gives you a good suite of tools that you can kind of pick and choose from depending on what your opponent is asking questions of you, and you can kind of go, okay, you are firing a whole bunch of strength 4 at me. All right, let me drop that all to strength 3. Oh, you're gonna um you've got a bunch of damage output that I need to be able to deal with. Cool. Reroll wants to hit and wound or +2 move. There's also like a small, I don't know if it's an oversight, but I'll cover it here, which is that if you join an Inquisitorial Psyker to a unit, that is considered a Psych, and that does start a Psyker unit. It's all of those keywords, which means that you can benefit from some of these slightly more out there Inquisitorial options. And I've called out one of them in the key data sheets, which we'll have a touch on in a second. Last thing is the Thousand Suns matchup gets really funny. You are almost army-wide going to have a field of pain against all of their relevant damage output, which is just, if nothing else, incredibly funny. I don't know if it's strictly the best thing in the world, but Thousand Suns are potentially on the up and up. Some of their natural predators got spiked out of the metagame with Sisters of Battle and Gene Circle copying some pretty serious changes. I would not be surprised to see a bunch of Thousand Suns popping up in the metagame again. And you have an edge against that. So key data sheets for Librarius Conclave, we have the Librarian. Shockingly, it's the easiest access to all the things. It gives your unit a 4 vulnerable save, which is just generally a good buff. They're definitely precisionable. They don't have amazing damage output, but they had a bit, right? They have a decent enough D6 shot, strength 6 damage, D3 gun. They're okay in combat. And then the defensive buff is genuinely quite good. I think they can go into a lot of really cool units. Blade Guard being one of the few that they really can't. You have to look for either Ezekiel or Tigurius for that. But because they have the 4 vulnerable save, it's actually quite nice to have them join something that doesn't have one anyway. With the changed armor contempt in the balance data slate, it's less big of a deal. It's more of a big deal that you have the 4 vulnerable save now, right? It just helps you keep that durability on your Space Marines high. I think Starguard veterans are incredibly good in this detachment. You can get them both rural. You can get them anti-monster, anti-vehicle 5+ with their 3-shot devastating wound guns, and then with rurals to wound to get your oath target and +1 to wound, they will absolutely rinse through almost any target in the game. And I think that is really cool. I think it's genuinely one of the most compelling things you can do in this detachment, and I really like it. It's the kind of thing that I look at and I'm like, okay, cool, that feels like what Starguard should do. Because sometimes you just 6s full wound rerolls, you just don't do much damage. And this detachment, they'll do damage, right? You have a 55% conversion rate, potentially sustained hits as well. Really, really, really happy with that. It's a really cool combo. Caria Draxus, I really, really like in this detachment as well. She's an Inquisitor and she's a Psyker, and she gives you War Operative 18 inches, which means you can attach her to a squad of Intercessors or Heavy Intercessors and really just keep them, like, give them access to all the rules. You can have them with reroll ones to hit and wound or +2 move and just moving around the board doing their damage using all the stratagems and just like really sinking damage up out. And then Carrier herself is no slouch in shooting. She's got her anti gun, and it's the effects all apply to the unit. So reroll ones to hit and wound on Carrier just as good. And then Mephiston is kind of my last shout out. He himself is a Psyker. Obviously, he's very happy with the reroll ones to hit and wound. He's very happy with +2 movement. Just helps you get him around the board. Helps him do a bunch of stuff. -1 strength on incoming attacks can help him be even scammier. Try to kill him with your strength 5 heavy bolters. Cool, wound me on 5s. Any of these kind of things. It really does just give you a bunch of cool things to do with him. He can also randomly have additional grenade. You could push him up to strength 11 outside of Liberator. Big fan. I think Mephiston is kind of the thing that I would be looking at here. Now, I will say for this one, I have gone with Dark Angels for the specific list. I did have a look at doing a few other ones, Pedro Cantor, but with a buff Strangard squad, and then a second one with a librarian with the Fusilier enhancements was one direction I had a look at. I think you could definitely build this list in a bunch of different ways, but the thing that I most immediately gravitated to was if I'm running librarians and they give me a 4 vulnerable save, why don't I do the one place so far this edition where that's been proven as a viable thing to do, which is in Dark Angels Gladius within Instructor Companions. That's been a thing that has shown up in tournament winning lists or tournament placing lists before, is Inner Companions with Librarians, and Inner Companions really like a vulnerable save because they're minus one to hit, but no invulnerable save. Giving them that does make them a lot more durable. So here is the Dark Angels list. So we have Azrael and 5 Intercessors, just a good little, we have really good stratagems, so CB Barrett support it. Ezekiel plus 6 Inner Companions gives them plus 1 attack. They'll be a little less durable. We're probably going to throw them in an Impulsor to make sure that they're getting around the board and not leaning on that durability so much. We have a Librarian with Celerity, which is advance in charge. That can also go inside the Impulsor for some additional movement. Stick, what's it called? The +2 move, Biomancy for +2 move, and then that unit can jump out, move 8, and then disembark 3, and then charge and have some pretty good damage up while it's doing so. +1 to hitting his character units, really good, or take your brutal ones to hit and wound if you don't need that additional distance. We've got a Librarian with Obfuscation and 6 Initial Companions. This is the one where it gives you unable to be fired Overwatch at, and then also loan up 18 if you're in the telepathy discipline, which is one that you will probably not be in a ton, but it seemed like the kind of thing that was nice to have access to in an early turn. It means you can walk up the board. If you're not planning on doing much damage that turn, you're just going to kind of be staging. Put them on can't be shot and run up the table with them and Carry Adraxis, who is buffing up another squad with the same role, and really make your opponent come to you. We have a Librarian with Fusillade with the Anti-Monster Anti-Vehicle 5+ enhancement, as discussed before. Just really, really good damage output. This is your kind of solve a problem unit. Inquisitor Draxus with 10 heavy intercessors is one of the more interesting things here. That unit's very durable. It's really good against damage 1, which is most it gets possible saving against it. Most small sort of skirmishing units tend to be pretty heavily damage 1. So that 10 heavy intercessor unit sitting on like a mid objective, just saying, you can't shoot me. We have really good guns at 30-inch range. We can't be shot, and if you try to run at us with small stuff, we'll beat you up with like Draxus damage plus Space Marine combat, or will just not care, right? And I think that's the kind of thing that's really compelling. And then 2 Scout Squads and an Impulsor as just kind of your backup, make sure you can play the game and score. But I thought it was important to kind of go through character assignments for this one and kind of run through them. But you could definitely switch this up in some matchups, right? You could always, if you're really worried about the invulnerable save, you could always put Azrael into an Inner Companion squad, Ezekiel in with the Intercessors, and have 3 squads of Inner Companions with a 4 invulnerable save, which is just a lot of meat with high OC to put in front of your opponent, and then some really good damage output. I think Libby Conclave is genuinely quite compelling. It has really cool options. It gives you so much ability and agency to play the game in a fun and interesting way. I don't necessarily think it's like amazingly powerful, but I have it over here near sort of where Deathwatch is. I think it's a much more interesting attachment than Lion's Blade. Lion's Blade has one cool stratagem and then doesn't really have anything else. I think it's about as good as Deathwatch, but I think for me, the way that I like to play the game, it gives me, because it has the ability to play in so many different detachments and so much access to like a range of cool Space Marine tools, and then has some real good shooting options, some real good melee options, and then just like supports whatever you want to do. I think for me, it's genuinely quite interesting. I don't think it's hitting the heights of the Custodes Dreadnought detachment or Death Guard, but and it's definitely no Star Shatter or Warpbane, but I like it quite a lot. And I would not be surprised to see it do well at tournaments or even win a tournament sometime in the near future. Okay. Next up, we have Creations of Bile, which is one of the few that has already won a tournament. It came out on Friday, and it has already won a tournament in the hands of the person we'll be talking about on the second slide, because I literally just stole the list for that one. So this is Hit Hard, Hit Fast, the detachment. You get to roll randomly for 2 buffs or pick a buff, and if you have Bile, you can reroll. You can get +2 move, +1 toughness, +1 strength, +1 attack, +1 weapon skill, or +1 ballistic skill. I believe the math is that if you are trying to avoid doubles or getting +1 ballistic skill, it is 93% chance if you have Fabius Bile as your warlord to get that. Which is really good. All of those buffs are, except ballistic skill, are genuinely really, really awesome. Hitting on 2s with your Chaos Space Marines with sustained hits or lethal hits, or having toughness 6 chosen with Fabius Bile, toughness 7 possessed. These are all just numbers that make your opponent have problems. You can have strength 6 or 5 attack, 5 attack warp talons. You can have Nemesis Claw going in, hitting on 2s. Like all these great things, right? Like so many cool options. Chaos Lords getting that +1 strength, +1 attack pushes them to 7 attacks at strength 10 when they pop chance for glory. Just really, really interesting. You can always pick if you're in a matchup where it really matters as well. If you're just like, it's really important that I hit a breakpoint, I need the +1 strength or I need the +1 attack to really be able to make sure I'm doing this damage, or you're playing against Death Guard who can drop your weapon skill across the army, hit the +1 weapon skill button, and you can make sure that you're always connecting your damage that you need to, right? Like, it gives you a ton of interesting things here. I did forget to change the last line here, so do not worry about that. You get a Chaos Lord who hits so hard, reroll hits and +1 damage on a Chaos Lord is frankly absurd. Having 3s rerolling and then probably 3s rerolling to wound in a Chaos Legionary unit means that guy will almost guaranteed kill whatever he touches, and then he's still damage 3 after the turn is over. Where currently, going down to damage 2 does mean that the Chaos Lord on the repeat is not quite as compelling. He definitely does now do much more. There's also a regeneration stratagem, which is great. Just always having the ability to scam primary, right? I can put a Legionnaire squad onto an objective, and then put 3 of them behind a wall, and if you kill 1 or 2 of them, I can just grow them back and get the primary anyway. Or I can always threaten to take, if you've tried to flip an objective off me, you kill 3 or 4 of my dudes, I bring them back. Cool, I hold the objective now, and also I'm back at fighting power. I get some additional distance towards you, and I've still got an advanced charge stratagem, which is really good to have access to. It's also not bad for bringing back like randomly a possessed or an obliterator or anything in that kind of vein. We'll say last at thousands here because you can just run at them and punch them in the face really hard and they'll die. But the real answer is that you still get all of the good generic Chaos Space Marines tools, right? You still have sustained hits, you have a fight on death stratagem, you have an advanced charge stratagem, you've got Cypher, you've got Predators, you've got allies, Nurglings, War Dogs, anything you're looking for, right? Like, you still have access to all of the CSM arsenal. The only thing you don't really get is Abaddon, because you want Fabius Bal to be your warlord, and if you want to run Abaddon, he has to be your warlord, so you would lose out on access to that. So generally, I think this is kind of the one you won't see Abaddon in it. But outside of that, it does give you basically everything you could really be looking for. So yeah, key data sheets. Fabius Bile, I think, is the standout. You will probably have him. You will probably have him in a squad of 10 chosen. He makes that unit absolutely sing. +1 strength, +1 toughness, and then adding even more buffs on top of that. Save blanking. They already advance in charge, so you're not stressing that resource. And fight on death does make them a little bit more durable. You are going to lose access to armor attempt, but after the changes, that's not as big a deal. Possessed are great in this attachment. They just are the biggest, beefiest boys to be worth buffing, right? Giving them +2 move, pushing them to movement 11, or giving them +1 strength, pushing them to strength 6 really helps them with those breakpoints. And there's a reroll to wound stratagem against character units, which means that possessed are now suddenly able to actually use their devastating wounds to like really, really mulch through like the wrong kinds of targets. Yes, it's 2 CP, but it is still just a fantastic thing to have access to. And this attachment is not like, it's definitely CP friendly, but it's not the most brutal CP detachment I've ever seen. The fact that you have Chaos Lord for free strat and things like that, and the Chosen, if you're going to run them, already have advance in charge. Like, you can save for it if you need it, I think, is kind of how I would describe it. CSM infantry, I'm kind of putting this as a lump together of Legionnaires, Warp Talons, Nemesis Claw, and Chosen are all kind of in this range of generically good Marine body that has good weapon that benefits from 5 of the 6 buffs. And honestly, even if you hit Blessed Skill and a good buff, you're like not upset that your last cannon hits on 3s now out of the Legionnaire squads that you're running about with. You'll always just be like, all right, cool, man. I guess I just have that now. It's definitely like a fine thing to have access to. I've seen some builds out there flowing with like 85 Marine bodies that you just get 2 buffs on them, and if you hit the right 2, it's really tough to deal with that much OC and that much pressure on the board that has advance and charge, fight on death, and regeneration. And then dealer's choice guns. For me, I think there's a few different places you can look here. Obliterators are, again, quite good, being 922 in melee. They do quite benefit from a lot of the additional buffs there. If you hit the +1 blessed skill, it's not bad on obliterators. They benefit from it more than most. They can also use the regeneration stratagem. I think Chaos Predators are completely fine. They're just a good data sheet. And then in the list that we'll be talking about in a second, it's War Dog Huntsman, because they just, they're pretty good. They have high OC and they have a bit of melee, which this attachment isn't complaining about having a little bit of additional melee to kind of help out with any given problems. We are over a third of the way through, guys. Oh, wow, this is going to take a while. All right, so here we have our GT winning Creations of Bile list. So Anthony Vanella played this at the Rogue State Gaming Charity GT. Chaos Lord Prime Test Subject, which is +1 damage and reroll hits. Cypher, Fabius Bile, 10 Cultists, 2x5 Legionnaires, 3 Chosen, or 3 Rhinos, 5 Chosen, 10 Chosen, which will get Bile, Nemesis Claw, 2 squads of 10 possessed, and 2 War Dog Huntsmen as his shooting package. Just absolutely blows the brakes off. It runs at you, hits you really hard in the face, and hopes there's nothing breathing at the end of it. You've got Nemesis Claw and Cypher to screw with CP on your opponent's side, so it's really hard for them to use stratagems to drag with you. Makes you very good into melee mirrors. And then you've got the Chaos Lord the Chaos Lord and Fabius' squad to go and solve real problems. You got a 5 of Chosen so that you don't feel the need to spend your CP early game if you want to be conserving for doing full wound rerolls or anything like that. Just if you want to start with Curations of Bile, give this a shot. Anthony's a very well-known, strong combat player, and I'm sure this list won't change for the next 8 months because Anthony never changes his lists. So there you go. Go forth and conquer. Personally, I'd run Predators over War Dog Huntsman, but I understand the appeal. Okay, where do I have Creations of Bile? I have Creations of Bile here. Now, I'm going to call this maybe a little bit rude, but it's my tier list. Creations of Bile is doing the exact same thing that Renegade Raiders and Veterans of the Long War does it's just the same data sheets in the same packaging with different names on it. It really is. It is just another way to play the same army. And I think that's a little disappointing for me. It does almost nothing novel. It's a different power buff. You can get +1, you can randomly get +1 weapon skill, +1 strength instead of +1 AP, right? Like, and assault, right? Like, it just, to me, it's very boring, I suppose. Like, it's just Renegade Raiders or Veterans of the Long War with slightly different changes, which is exactly what I'm talking about. Now, is it a very good detachment? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the most powerful detachments they've shown so far, based on the fact that it's the third highest ranked detachment on my tier list right now, or my tier chart, I suppose. But it is just the same things in a new package. It gets some points for being random, but lol random is the kind of thing where, man, you're gonna feel really bad as the Creations of Bile player when you roll ballistic skill, and you're gonna feel really overpowered when you roll +1, when you roll +2 move, +1 attack. And the fact that there is so much gulf between those two options is going to make this a very inconsistent and very frustrating army to play against, which I think for me costs it some points. But really good. It is really good. All right, next up we have Reaper's Wager, which is the Drukhari and Harlequins attachment. So this is rerolls for everyone. You get reroll ones to hit and wound for your units, depending on who most recently killed something. So if your Drukhari units most recently killed something, your Harlequins have reroll ones to hit and wound, and then vice versa if your Harlequin units most recently killed one. So it encourages you to play a game plan that has like a bit of both, so you can pass back and forth between them during the same phase. Kill something with my Scourge unit, and then kill something with my Haywire Bikes, then kill something with my Talos, then kill something with my Death Chester, right? And passing it back and forth to keep those rerolls active for everything. Or you can also kind of do it as, I'm going to activate my Dark Eldar squads first when my Harlequins are winning, and I'm going to try to leave a bunch of things like at full health, like a little bit of health. I'm going to do a bunch of damage to 4 or 5 things, just going through them in sequence if you're just not killing something. And you're just like, all right, cool. I've not killed it. I'm just going to keep going with my Dark Elder units until I kill something. And then you switch back over to your Harlequins and you just keep doing the same, right? It gives you like a really nice rhythm tempo kind of approach of, can you balance, your lethality from 2 different sides of the army? And you're allowed to play up to 1,000 points of Harlequins instead of the usual 500, which again gives you access to some really cool game plan. It has easy access to advance and charge. Drukhari do not have this right now. There are some shenanigansy ways, and there is witches that have it, but this detachment gives you just like go forth and conquer. And it's also advance and shoot. So Talos and Grotesques are a really big beneficiary of this. Really big fan of it for them. You've also got a damage stratagem, which is not a thing that's super common for Drukhari. You have a sustained hits 1 / lethal hit stratagem that you can use whenever you want, right? Like you can just kind of decide you want it this turn on a melee unit or a ranged unit or anything in between. I should probably have Lilith in this army. I don't in the one that we're going to talk about, but I would try and find some points for a solo Lilith. And then, yeah, very open-ended inclusion. Like all the stratagems, all the buffs are kind of, they just hit anything. So you can kind of play whatever you want. Now, as far as key data sheets, I think Scourges remain one of the best data sheets in the game. They really, really, really like wound rerolls, and the hit rerolls means that you're not locked into always using a pain token on them. Again, I don't think my army that we're about to talk about has a Kronos. I would probably recommend finding one of those. These definitely got built in a day. So yeah, the Solitaire really likes reroll once hit and wound, just gives that guy a bunch of consistency. Blitz move is super powerful, and it just gives you the ability to kind of solve that problem in melee with I guess probably the best melee unit available to Harlequins in terms of like random isolated damage. So I went for that because it as being really powerful, really good inclusion. 3 from vulnerable save is very frustrating, and you can advance and charge even outside of your blitz turn. With the like, it just its general data sheet rule, which is great to have access to. Grotesque and Talos have guns and combat, which is a great combination in a detachment that has advance and shoot and charge stratagem. And Skyweavers are probably the best Harlequin shooting alongside like the Death Jester in terms of being able to pop vehicles and use their dev wounds to, like chew through like the remainder of a couple of models in a random squad, and real ones to hit and wound just helps with their efficiency there again. So as far as our list goes, I've got an Archon with Arc Raider, which gives you Scout for his transport. Means you can put him inside a Venom, scout it forward, and then sticky an objective with the Venom's base rule from Cabalites. And then, drive your Venom off somewhere else to go and threaten to sticky another objective, or go and get a bunch of guns in your opponent's face turn 1, or potentially combat your opponent's face turn 1 in some deployment zone. A Death Jester, a Solitaire, Drazhar, combat, shooting, 10 Cabalite Warriors to split with the Venom, 6 Grotesques, 5 Incubi to go with Drazhar inside one of the Venoms. Losing access to the Lance from Sky Splinter Assault does hurt Incubi, but it does give you like a nice little problem-solving unit with Drazhar. Real wants to hit and wound means that unit is not as dependent on using pain tokens. Again, like kind of trying to keep yourself away from using pain tokens as much as you can because they are a fairly limited resource. 1 squad of Mandrakes for scoring, 3 squads of Scourges. I generally like these with 3 Haywire Blasters, 1 Dark Lance. The Dark Lance just means that if you accidentally kill your target with like the first thing of Haywire and you don't have something else, you can shoot a gun at further range to make sure you can always maintain your fire and fade to keep them going for the entire game. And again, less dependent on giving them a pain token every time you want to activate them, because they're now on force rolling 1s. Is it perfect? No, you will still miss a decent amount of the time with them, but they will fire for 5 turns of the game most games you play. 3 squads of 2 Skyweavers. I think this is probably where I would trim from to try to find points for Lilith and a Kronos just to keep your pain tokens active. But again, Haywire Blasters or Haywire, I think they're Haywire Cannons for Skyweavers. Just really, really, really solid damage output into vehicles, which there are a ton of in the metagame right now. 2 squads of Talos. I think Haywire Blasters or Heat Lance is an easy option here. The Heat Lance does give you some additional spike damage for killing big vehicles, and with the real ones to hit them, it's not as big a deal to not have. And then they're quite good at once they get their full rules turned on and they become permanently empowered, they can really just rinse damage through with advanced shoot as well. And then 2 Venoms, as discussed, for the Cabalites and the Incubi. I think I really, really do quite like Reaper's Rage. I have up here, I think it creates a brand new playstyle for Drukhari that just didn't exist before, of like this back and forth trading style shooting army that has advance and charge and lots of mixed armor stuff. That you like. Sky Splinter is very all in on playing transport. Real Space Raiders is very all in on playing like this slow defensive game. Whereas this detachment's like, you have tons of stuff to do. There's a bunch of details that aren't that great outside of it that are really good in it. I think there's some interesting things with doing like a beast pack with the Ignore Overwatch stratagem that can jam forward and charge your opponent's entire army and just be like, cool man, you're just in combat now. Stay. We're not playing the game together anymore, right? And then you charge them with their entire rest of your army and don't get Overwatch because you went in with this beast pack with this huge footprint and scout first. And it was just staged up, causing massive problems. I don't think it's like insanely powerful. I think this would be really interesting in like a team environment when you're using it to prey super aggressively on vehicle lists or anything like that. But it still does have the fundamental like a Venom can just die to grenade, and that is a difficult thing to be willing to be like, I'm gonna all in on playing this in tournament environment. So I think for me, it's good but not perfect, but it definitely, and as always, as I said with this, anything that's like next to something else, you could probably assume that it could swap places with it and be basically the same. I'm trying to do this as like I'm going to keep each grid to exactly one thing, and that is meaning that sometimes there's a couple of things where I'm like, man, I would really like to move that one down 1 to give this one up 1 and things like that, right? So you can basically assume that like this cluster of 6 here are all like vaguely equivalent to me with like a preference to the ones on the right hand side, right? If that makes sense. But not necessarily a guarantee. Like you could probably swap this with AdMech and I wouldn't be too upset, or you could swap it with Librarius and again I wouldn't be too upset. Okay, Armored Warhost, which is probably my least favorite detachment of all of them that have come out so far, outside of the Tyranid Warrior one, which I don't like for reasons entirely my own. It's go fast and use strats to be battle host, and then I don't really get this detachment. You get advance and shoot, and your fly vehicles can reroll advances. You can use a strat to get the battle host rule plus a damage reroll, which is just so underwhelming. You have a worse version of fallback and shoot. You don't have phantasm. You don't have fire and fade. You can 6-inch deep strike, which is probably really good for fire dragons, except they're still only 12-inch range, so they're still dropping outside of melter range, except for Fuegan and the fire pike, which is just not a ton of damage output for a unit for something you're spending a lot of points on. The key data sheets for me, the War Walker benefits probably the most from having assault. Like you can really put the brakes on for an alpha strike with 2 or 3 War Walkers advanced in shooting, but without the battle host rerolls for your hit and damage or your hit and wound, you're not actually going to convert nearly as often with a War Walker as you would like to. Support weapons also quite like the ability to move, right? Movement 3 is not your favorite thing to be playing with, and it does help the D cannons really get in range. But again, losing out on the rerolls and battle host really kind of sucks. Fire prisms are probably one of the few data sheets that really doesn't mind losing the rerolls because it still has two natural ones, one to hit and one to wound. So it's much better at catching angles and playing aggressively, but not having fire and fade makes it harder to protect. And then the wave serpent is, again, it's a vehicle that has a couple decent guns that can like get some forward pressure and really play aggressively and deliver its payload. You've got the disembark stratagem after moving. So kind of putting a list together for this, I went for um, a Ultrarch Wheelleaper with Godful Strategist that lets you redeploy, so you can redeploy 3 units to try to put your guns in the most relevant positions. If you play a list like this, like you're playing Ironstorm, you've got to have your guns in the most relevant positions to start firing as quickly as you can. You have advance and shoot, so you can get them there. It's then about just firing that damage as much as you can. Farshare with Guiding Presence gives you some additional, gives you easier use of Fate dice and +1 to hit to make sure that you're connecting as much of your damage as you can. Fuegan, because he's just stupid, very, very favorable data sheet. Losing access to Phantasm does make him harder to use, but he will still do a lot of work. He still has very good damage and is just very, very annoying. Um, I am still a big fan of like just him in general. Two squads, of course, are Void Reavers. These are going to give scout to our Wave Serpents so we can get them on the board, use their speed, get that blaster in range, and start them firing and getting scoring points. We have a squad of Rangers to give us some ability to block the scout pathways so that we're not getting infiltrate blocked ourselves. Two squads of Swooping Hawks, a squad of War Spiders for some scoring and damage output. 3 Fire Prisms, 3 War Walkers, and 2 Wave Serpents is our sort of damage core. I don't think this is great. It definitely has like Ironstorm problems. It has low reliability. It's very, very fast for what it is. You have a lot of vehicles with fly that can really, really get in your opponent's face and like can really, really just like make your opponent, under quite a lot of pressure. But is this better than Battle Host? Would this exact 2,000 points just be better than Battle Host? I think both of those things are just yes right now. It remains to be seen. We are due an Eldar book fairly soon. This detachment might look a lot better under that guise. But for now, I am definitely looking at it and going, I don't understand why you would play this over Battle Host at the moment. So for me, it comes down here, and who is this for? I don't get it. It's objectively probably slightly better than the Thousand Suns detachment in the sense that it has some slightly better rules. It's got some actual mobility, and it doesn't just like directly overlap with things data sheets are already doing. But ultimately, there's not a ton of like interest here. It just does a lot of things that you already could do in Battle Host without the shenanigans, without the flexibility. The fact that the fallback stratagem is locked to just fallback and shoot, and only for certain things, where the Eldar Battle Host one is for anything, for example, just like makes it really look like befuddling for why you would bother. Um, which is probably a sign that Battle Host is going to change a whole bunch in the new book, or not exist, right? Like we've seen that happen before as well. But for the time being, I can't remotely recommend Battle Host to anybody. Okay, Tactical Brigade for Orcs. I think this is another super, super cool detachment. And that hurts my feelings because I don't like orcs conceptually. I think they're one of my least favorite armies. I think everybody who's heard me talk on the internet before knows that. But they have some really, really cool things with being able to hit different strength breakpoints with their order system, being able to give +1 strength outside of the WA. A lot of orcs data sheets are like right on awkward strength thresholds. Boys are strength 4, Beast Snagger boys are strength 5, Breaker boys are strength 6, right? Like there's a lot of things where you're just like +1 strength would really help me to just make sure like I'm really getting damage through, and having access to on-demand functional +1 to wound a lot of the time you need it is really, really cool. You have reroll charges to just make sure your reliability is staying high even outside of the WA. And then you have +1 to hit for shooting, which helps with that mixed arms damage for, whether you're playing Lutas and Flash Kits with their reroll ones to hit from mechs, which is just a hint, probably what the list is going to focus on a lot. But then also just having the ability to have, your Flash Kits go for rerolls. Yeah, really, 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 really good. Mixed arms damage in orcs is something that we've seen out of some dreadmod builds where they can kind of spam like a bunch of shots with lethals or sustained and just kind of like hope for the best. And this detachment kind of like takes it to the logical extreme and goes, okay, you can actually really, really sink your teeth into the damage output in the shooting phase now with that +1 to hit from orders. You're not going to be like, I don't know if you're going to be necessarily strictly out shooting most armies. But because you can have the mechs issue orders to their own unit and just be like, cool, you have +1 to hit, and I have stealth and cover, and you're like, it's much harder to interact back with them than I think you would expect. It's very tactical of them. They're really doing a good job of showing off their tic tacs. It's also got some good out of phase options. Having the access to Storm Boys as a battle line unit means you can get a lot of access to the like pseudo grenade stratagem. And with them having natural advance and charge, they're really good at just getting stuck into the game and keeping your opponent off of your sort of backfield brawling. And then you're still orcs in the mid game. You've also got the ability to like fall back and shoot, fall back and charge in this army, which means that stuff like Lutas isn't as necessarily like locked down to playing super defensively. You can kind of push them out the board and actually do some scoring. Last thing that I think is really interesting here, you can run a Beast Boss on Squiggosaur or a Death Killer Wartrike, which then takes an enhancement and attaches to a squad of commandos, which gives it access to the ability to just be in your opponent's face and go and charge on turn one, or like redeploy it into a very aggressive position, but safely with the redeploy enhancement. And there's some really cool things there. I don't think it's strictly super viable. You're talking like 250 plus points for that combination, and it is only okay. But it's the kind of thing that like I would not be surprised to see people experimenting with and doing well with, because it does give you a lot of forward pressure for like getting the game on the go early. As far as key data sheets, Flash Kits, Storm Boys, Looters, and Breaker Boys are some of the strongest data sheets in Orcs in general. Flash Kits are like a little bit less right now, but we've seen people playing both of them and Looters as their shooting core in a lot of lists recently, especially in Dreadmob, and this detachment does more for them than the Dreadmob does. Possible to hit for Orcs is generally really, really solid, especially with their death guns being heavy, but plus skill 6, right? Like they want to be on the move a lot, right? Getting them up to 5s really, really helps with that unit just like being on the move and getting the reroll hits against units on an objective a lot more frequently, because you would much rather be moving them, right? And getting them with a rapid fire range for that +1 shot, getting them with the 3 shots. Storm Boys are just great. Battle line makes them much easier to use about. It helps you with interaction with some secondary missions, not secondary missions, like oh my goodness, words are failing me. Things like banners. And then Breaker Boys are just a really, really good data sheet. They're the new Tank Buster equivalent from Kill Team. They have damage 3 melee attacks, and this detachment has a sustained hit stratagem and can give them +1 strength, so they can be strength 8 in the WA, which means they can wound Space Marines on 2s if they're in a situation where they can't be hitting a vehicle, or you can, punch the hell out of ever living hell out of a vehicle with reroll charges. Just really, really cool. Gives you access to some bomb swigs. Just a great unit. I think the list I'm running is going to be running them with war bosses, and we'll kind of touch on that now. So this list came courtesy of Brian Sipe. I don't believe he wrote it. I believe he was just referencing it, but he said that I should put this one in the video, so we're putting this one in the video. So we got 3 big mechs with shock attack guns, just good solid shooting, benefits from the reroll hits, benefits from the +1 to hit, joins a squad of looters, does good guns. We've got a big mech in Mega Armor with Mech Captain bringing a model back every turn and giving our 10 flash kits full rerolls, which means that they are rinsing damage through with sustained hits and +1 AP, +1 shot against closest target, lethal hits once per game. Just Bad Rock is back in a big way. We've got 2 war bosses joining 2 squads of Breaker Boys. They'll be going inside trucks and just again really just rinsing damage through. I believe the trucks hold 12, which means you can put 5 flash kits, 6 Breaker Boys, and a war boss inside a truck, and have that twice, and then another 10 with either 10 flash kits or one of the looter squads in it, just causing problems. And that is a lot of pressure per truck, right? Having 2 reasonable units, one of which is melee, one of which is shooting, really does just cause problems in a good way for you interacting with your opponent. And then we've got 4 squads of Storm Boys and 2 squads of Gretchen as our sort of scoring and playing the game package, which is again just gives you a ton of dimensionality. I think this is definitely the most like the very shooting version of this build. There's probably some form of builds out here that are a little bit heavier into the melee things. I could see things like Beast Snagger Boys with their full hit rerolls really appreciating the sustained hit stratagem of the detachment, and being able to push them to strength 6 or strength 7 in the WA means that they have a lot more ability to punch through things that are maybe a little more durable. And then you've got the ability to reactively move back into trucks with the detachment. So having vehicles floating around the place is great. Having a reactive when your opponent falls back from you is just, oh, cool. You're going to fall back from the Breaker Boys. Cool. They're going to jump back into their ride, and then you're going to kill the ride, and they're going to disembark back behind that wall, and then I'm going to wah and run at you. Right? Like there's just so many shenanigans and stuff. And I think it's probably the strongest way to play Orcs. It's like up there with Warhorde. I think Warhorde makes out really well from the wah changes, and does quite like the new Breaker Boys data sheet, but Tactical Brigade gives you a ton of ways to play the game and really, really makes you feel like you have a lot of agency as an orc player. So I have orcs up here. I think it gives you new dimensionality and more power. I think it still has the fundamental kind of like orc problem of being like reasonably squishy, and you're still relying on orc shooting, and you don't have that much melee in this detachment. And you don't have like an amazing amount of support for it. Like you have enough, like you're going to keep people honest. You're going to be playing a real game. You've still got good melee orc units, but your WA is not going to be as overwhelming. Like I think it's interesting, but I don't think it's particularly broken. Right, the things that I have on the right hand side or on the far right are like I think these things are probably too much. I think Warpbane and Starshatter are that for me right now. Whereas Orcs is just like on the line of being one of the best things you can be doing in the game right now, I think. Really, really big fan of this detachment. Which sucks because I hate Orcs. All right, next up we have the Bridgehead Strike. To be honest, I don't know what a bridgehead is, and I'm not going to learn. This is the strike hard, strike first attachment. You get reroll ones to hit on all your infantry, and +1 to wound if you came out of reserve with a Scion unit or out of a transport with a Scion unit. It has amazing on and off board mobility. You have advance and shoot stratagem to help you keep your guard units like actively playing the game. I cannot remember if that also gives you fall backhand. I do not believe it does. So there is still the advantage that you can at least tag these things up, but they do have a stratagem to make you take more wounds if you tag them on a 2-up d6 more wounds than they take 3d3, which means they can kill themselves out of combat with you if you're not tagged enough of them up. You got to tag 7 models to guarantee you don't get shot. You don't get shoved out of combat and then shot back, which is really frustrating. A really, really difficult thing to play around if you're not careful. So yeah, it's got really good alpha strike potential with turn 1. It's got an up down mechanic with the Valkyrie stratagem. So yeah, 1 Scion unit with deep strike can go back in reserve for 1 CP. You've got strip cover stratagem. You've got really good enhancements for handing out a bunch of orders without needing Leontas. Yeah, really, really, really cool detachment. It gives you a ton of dimension. Scion units as battle line in general, and also becoming OC2 means that they're much easier to flip objectives with. And then the 6-inch deep strike stratagem helps you get them close. And then you've got a +1 shot or +1 AP stratagem and +1 strength stratagem, which again, just with having ignore access to ignore cover, you've got the exterminators with the armor of contempt change. Like, it's very, very easy for this to just like rinse through infantry and medium vehicles and then still have a decent shot of killing bigger vehicles with some of the more rerolly stuff. So yeah, as far as interesting data sheets go, I think Tempested Scions and Tempested Aquilons are the kind of thing that you'll probably see 3 to 6 squads of Scions in every list because they just benefit the most from the rules in general. Aquilons, again, don't not appreciate the +1 to wound. Getting them up to strength 3 with with +1 to wound and reroll ones to hit means that they will consistently deal damage when they 6-inch deep strike into your backfield, into your opponent's backfield to score a card or pick up a unit or score your mark for death or whatever you need to be doing with them or do a move block. The Tyrox Prime gives you full wound rules when you disembark from it, and then also +1 to wound. Very, very good for specific kinds of data sheets. Like a 5-man Scion scope with a Primaris Psyker shoots really damn hard coming out of a Tyrox. Or you can put a full 10-man inside it in some situations. You've got a decent bit of modality with this detachment where you could kind of change some things around, put some stuff in reserve, put some stuff on the board, depending on whether you want on or off board pressure. And then the fast AP vehicles, the main ones here being the Leman Exterminator and the Hellhound, both really, really like having access to advance and shoot. If you've just got to get your +AP somewhere, you can either get it by removing cover or by putting +1 AP on them from the Exterminator. And then the same thing applies to Leman Tank Commanders, which will just being able to go +3 move and then advance and shoot, or being able to go advance and shoot and then +1 to hit, so that they can avoid losing to tape measure. You can't just measure the distance that they can physically go and then stay behind the angle. They can always threaten it a little more. It helps that you keep that sort of on-board pressure, so your opponent can't just disrespect your like on-table presence and play around your reserves, because you have decent on-board shooting that can get to where they are and cause them like some real problems. So as far as the list goes, we have Ursula Creed, lots of really good stratagems. If you've been playing guard for a long time, you'll know that the stratagems are generally not super amazing right now. But Creed just with this attachment, you have a lot. You can use her every turn. Just go pick a unit up every turn within 12 of her, and not have to worry about it. Or you can do any of the offensive stratagems. 3 Silent Command Squads, giving out the sustained hits to their unit. Priority drop beacon for turn 1. For turn 1 reserve, advanced augury, I believe, I'm going to just double check before I say something wrong, is the redeploy 3 units. So you can make sure you can get enough stuff into reserve in any given matchup, or move your tank commanders wherever you need them to be. Regiment units only, does not apply to tank commanders. And then we have the Bombast class Vox Array, which gives you 3 orders for the Tempested Scion squad when it sets up, which means that you can just make sure that everything is getting its OC or getting its +1 skill or getting its +1 shot to maximize your damage output. Primaris Psyker to join a 5 of Scions to give you some wound rolls jumping out of Target's Prime, gives you that onboard pressure to go and like make sure that something dies early without necessarily having to commit your deep striking squad. 2 tank commanders with Demolisher cannons, a Leman Rush Prime and an Exterminator are your package of onboard shooting and scoring. Like, just make sure your opponent can't pressure you, because they can't just walk into line of sight of tank commanders, and the Hellhound and the Exterminator push you up to effectively AP4 ignore cover, or they can combine with your Scion squads for maximum drop damage. 3 squads of Scions, 10 mans to join the Scion command squads, 3 squads of 5, 2 for scoring, 1 for joining the Primaris Psyker and the transport. You can always put another 5 men in the transport as well, just to have some more stuff there. 2 squads of Ogryn for some counter charge and some durability. They're not insanely durable, but higher toughness, and they've got standard objectives in the open without just dying to like a squad of 5 acolytes in Gene Circle, for example, is the thing kind of thing you want to have access to. Nas described this list as perfectly okay. I don't think it's exactly the kind of direction that he's looking at going with it, but in general, I think if you were looking for a starting point, this is probably where I would go. There's a few tweaks here and there you can always make if you want to go higher or lower on the reserve focus or play more onboard presence. Things like rhinos with, or not rhinos, chimeras with catchhands are still really solid for getting your scout pressure up the board. Not having reinforcement of lethal hits is a definite degradation of the damage output of this detachment. You're a little bit more reliant on doing things for a long time rather than having like lethal hits and nuke everything. But we played tank commanders where they didn't have lethal hits, and this attachment gives them advanced shoot, so I can't imagine them not being at least pretty reasonable here. As far as where do I have them? I have them, guard are here. Again, I don't think this detachment does a ton in terms of opening up new playstyles. Scion Drop was already good. Tank commanders were already good. A lot of the stuff in this detachment is just the things that you were already playing in the regiment detachment in a different hat. But I do think it's a little more interesting than the Creations of Bio because it opens up a few new units. Things like the Tarx Prime being a little more interesting, adding uppy downy as like a game plan for the army that it just didn't have before, right? There's a bunch more like interaction points that it didn't have, where Bile is just kind of like a combination of a bunch of things you were already doing in different hats. Very powerful. I think it's a really strong detachment. I wouldn't be surprised to see people taking it to LVO or any future events. And I think it's just generally quite compelling. But it's nothing like altogether super special. But yeah, it goes in my powerful, compelling box. I think it's a cool detachment. All right, now we're into the demons ones. I want to quickly start before we do into all the demons ones. I'm going to do all 4 of them at the end in terms of their power level thing. So you'll catch all of them at the same time. And then all of them have a walkthrough wall stratagem, which is great. That stratagem is fantastic. Every single demons army is happy to have it. Being able to push your Bloodthirster, your Blood Crushers, your Keeper Secrets, your Great and Clean one through a wall and just start playing the game much more actively and causing problems for your opponent is a very good thing. Every single detachment benefits from it, and I will not be covering it other than where it's like specifically related to a data sheet. I will say that the Soul Grinder is going to show up a lot in these lists because it really likes it. It also benefits a lot from a bunch of the stuff that doesn't buff monsters. So if you don't like Soul Grinders, 3 of these 4 lists are going to include Soul Grinders. So I'm really sorry about that. So starting with Legion of Excess. This is the Chaos Demons for Slaanesh one. It buffs up your medium damage output. So basically, when you charge, you can always fall back and charge, which is great. Slaanesh units are generally fairly durable, which is odd. But like the Keeper Secrets has like -1 to hit and a 5 feel no pain. Shalaxi has -1 attack. Like and the Mask can kick out a -1 to wound aura. Just very, very like annoying things to deal with in a lot of situations. Fiends are -1 to hit. Just a whole bunch of like, okay, cool, we can like take a hit in combat. So if you can avoid getting shot too much and get into combat and then stick it in, you can fall back and then recharge back in, trigger your if I charge, I can decide to turn down fight first and instead have full rules to hit and wound. Now, really cool thing with that, if you're charging a vehicle that doesn't hit you very hard back, you can just give it the ability to hit you first and then absolutely shred it with whatever you're charging it with. Whether like Keeper Secrets typically suffer from fairly low strength, but if you're charging an Armiger Helverin or a Rhino or anything of that weight class, you're just kind of like, yeah, man, you can hit me first. I don't really care. And then even if you're charging into like reasonably relevant combat stuff, if you're only charging in with like 2 things or 4 things, you kind of like, well, you're only going to get it on 2 places, right? Like you're going to go there first, and then I'm going to like activate my first unit, right? Because you'll go back to alternating just because you lost fight first doesn't mean you don't alternate. So yeah, you kind of have to do the thing of instead of charging in even numbers, instead of charging in odd numbers like you would typically try to do to avoid it, avoid the like interrupt problem and stuff like that. You want to against fight first, you want to charge in even numbers. So if I charge with 2 things, you can start with 1, then I'll do mine, then you can do yours, then I'll do mine again, and I only lose like 1 place of priority there. Whereas if I only charge with 1 thing, you'll do your 1, then I'll do my 1, and I'm always disadvantaged, right? So there's a little bit of like nuance to playing around it, nothing too huge. You've got the best version of the charge mortal stratagem. It doesn't have a 6 wound cap, which is quite funny. So if you charge him with like a 10 of demonettes, you actually get to roll the 10 dice, and if you roll 10 4-ups, you do get 10 mortal wounds. That's typically not how these stratagems are worded. They usually cap at 6, and then monsters can also use it for 66, just as a grenade stratagem, which is again a great thing to have access to just in the detachment in general. You have a weirdly good Battle Shock the entire army board. Battle Shock basically the entire board. stratagem, which can both heal you and screw with your opponent, because it's a -1 if they're below half strength. Um, just generally kind of interesting. It's the kind of stratagem that like you'll occasionally use it because you want to like have a chance at flipping an objective or causing a problem or scoring a primary, and you're just like, well, it's worth a CP to like try to maybe scam this primary on my opponent, because if one of these two units fails it, I get the points and things like that, and they're all allowed to be -1 because they're in Shadow of Chaos, so potentially -2. Um, and then there's a really, really interesting stratagem with Thieves of Pain, which lets you bounce damage from a non-monster to any other unit. There is some cool stuff you can do with like the Contorted Epitome leading a unit of Demonettes, which has like 20 wounds with a fort feeling against mortal wounds. You can are effectively 20 wounds, which means that you can kind of absorb a bunch of damage that would be going into a Soul Grinder or like a Fiend squad that's in a really good position, and just making sure that you don't like just get completely murdered. It's an interesting approach. I'm not convinced it's incredible, but it's a good stratagem to like have access to and to kind of do the thing of, oh, you're going to charge my soul grinder because you shot it down to 4 wounds. Cool. I'm actually going to put the first 10 damage you do onto that demonette unit, even if it's just a regular or like onto a fiend unit, and then suddenly you're getting hit by the claw, and then I fall back and charge you again with my soul grinder. So it opens up some interesting play patterns for 1 CP. It's the kind of stratagem that your opponent's just going to have a difficult time dealing with. One thing that's notably not here, there is no advanced and charge stratagem and there is no up-down stratagem, which is a very real cost, right? Like this detachment is much slower, much more honest at getting at the board. There is probably an argument for putting Be'lakor into this detachment to stop you getting shot because you have fallback and charge and a bunch of good defensive mechanics against shooting or against melee, but adding one against shooting would be nice. I will say that for all of these detachments, I made an earnest attempt to have all of the list written be mono god and not include Be'lakor. There is one that is not. Um, but for all of the other ones, I was like, no other god units. Let's try and make an earnest attempt at playing these as all of them. I think, and I'll add this to this game as well. I think every single one of these attachments every single one of these suggested lists would benefit from putting a squad of play bearers in, and probably a squad of Nurglings, potentially two, or a lone operative like the Blue Scribes. In almost every case, I feel like those would improve the lists. But like I said, tried to make an earnest attempt to do these in monogod for everything except Corn, which does have a squad of play bearers in it, because I just could not find something I wanted with the points that was like reasonable. So let's kind of go through the list. So we have a sample list for Legion of Excess. I have the Mask of Slaanesh, very, very solid lone operative, hands out +1 to wound or -1 to wound in an aura in combat, as long as you're like playing the game actively and getting in your opponent's face, which I think is the exact kind of thing you want to be doing with Slaanesh anyway. She also advances and charges naturally, which means that you do keep some access to it. And she can um, benefit from the auras that are getting kicked out by the Keeper Secrets, pushing her to like AB2 and all that kind of thing. There's also a +1 to wound enhancement. Like the auras for this attachment are great. The natural Keeper Secrets aura is +1 AP, and then the aura for False Majesty that we have on this one is a 6-inch aura +1 to wound for non-monsters. So I have 3 Keepers of Secrets with the Signing Aegis for the 5 Feel No Pain. Keepers, they're the best thing to get full hit and wound rolls on. I'm sure nobody's shocked by that, but they have a lot of attacks, they have devastating wounds, and they're reasonably durable. They appreciate having a walk through wall stratagem, it makes them much more stable. They're good at rapid ingressing, and they're a lot cheaper than Shalaxi. 290 points, I want to say, for a keeper, which is very, very reasonable for the amount of beef and damage output you get from it. 10 Seekers. I love Seekers in general. They are Scout 14 or Scout 9 and Movement 14, meaning they can go 23 inches crossing all of No Man's Land turn 1 without advance and charging, and then charge the world and just tag them up with huge giant pill bases and really keep your opponent pinned in their deployment zone. And now they can walk through walls when they do that, and I personally think that's great. And when that's not good, it's still a lot of attack to benefit from +1 to wound from False Majesty and +1 AP. 3 squads of 3 Fiends, just a lot, very, very, very reasonable points per wound output for Fiends. They benefit from all the auras, and fallback and charge is a good thing to have access to. And then the Soul Grinder, it really likes the absorb damage stratagem, the +1 AP and the +1 to wound from the Keeper Secrets with False Majesty applies to them, so they can do a bunch of damage in combat, a bunch of damage in range. The gun for the Slaanesh Soul Grinder is probably the best one. It's 6 shots at 922 dev wounds, which again just adds a little bit of dimensionality to this list. I think there is probably an argument if I was going to try to do what I was saying, adding a Playbearer squad and a Nurgling squad, cut one of the Soul Grinders to do it. But honestly, we're not about that life here. We're not cowards. We'll play 3 Soul Grinders and run at people with the giant crab, man. You've got 8 crab things in this, or 6 crab things in this list, and for me, that's the correct amount of crab things. Don't read too much into that. Okay, next up we have Scintillating Legion, which is the Tzeentch one. It has not indirect. So actually, I'm going to very quickly touch on this. Has one of the strangest detachment rules I've ever read. It is basically you get 3 pseudo CP rerolls, and every time you use one, you pass one to your opponent. And then in your command phase, if your opponent is holding at least one of them, you gain one of them. So you can kind of like, I can kind of throw 3 rerolls, three rerolls at things, and then hand you 3 rerolls. And if you use them, I get them back. And if you don't use them, then I get more. So it's quite hard to kind of like stop you, and I can get rid of them to do increase my stratagem power. But like if you're using there's an up down stratagem that allows you to discard, like give your opponent one to lift 2 units. So if you use that at the end of your opponent's fight phase, immediately it goes into your command phase. So if you use that in hand, that stratagem, you will always be gaining an additional flux token. So you can kind of like make sure you're introducing more and more to the game that way. There's also an enhancement that gives you an additional one if your opponent's holding one, which again is like a nice thing to have access to. I don't think I have that in my list, but yeah, generally quite solid. There's a really interesting, like it's kind of like Brother Captain Stern, but the main thing that I kind of looked at it here is it encourages me to run big things because I can get bigger value rerolls. Now, what that meant for me, and you're going to hear this as a recurring theme, is I think the Tzeentch Soul Grinder is pretty damn good with this because the Tzeentch Soul Grinder's gun is D3 shots blast at 12 2d6 plus 1. And do you know what I really like having rerolls on is D6 plus 1 damage guns with strength 12 that wound that hit on 3s. That is just, I can consistently make sure I convert 1 or 2 more of those every turn. I've got good combat. I'm strength 16, AP3, D6 plus 2 damage in combat as well. Just like making sure that you're converting a bunch of damage on your opponent. You don't get as much out of the aura from the Lord of Change as you would otherwise, but you've got a bunch of access to free stratagems from Kara's Fate Weaver, who gives CP regeneration. You've got shooting output from Karas's indirect, and then also the not indirect from the Puppet Master, or Infernal Puppet Master enhancement, which lets you pick a model within 9 to use line of sight of. So you can set your Lord of Change behind the wall, go, I'm using the Soul Grinder's line of sight, and then shoot something without indirecting, but with indirect, which is really cool. Just gives you some good access. Flux is just a confusing ass rule. And then you've got a little bit of scam potential. I have that in here because of the Flux mechanic, just in general. Just being confusing and weird and like giving your opponent a bunch of rope to hang themselves with. Um, You've also got a stratagem to fire into engagement range of your opponent if they've got you tagged up. And then you've got a stratagem to leave the board even if you're in engagement range, which is really, really, really annoying. Delirium Unmade, it's lift 1 Tzeentch Demons unit. But if you spend a flux token as well, you can lift 2 and they can be in engagement range. So you can get Flamers of Tzeentch anywhere on the board. You can get Screamers moving about. You can get your Soul Grinders causing new and interesting, diverse problems anywhere you like. Really, 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 really powerful stratagem. One of the best in the game. And then Flickering Reality is maybe the strange stratagem. You roll 1 dice and your opponent's attacks of that value just miss, even if they're critical hits, right? Like, so if you roll a 6, your opponent's sustained hits don't trigger. And then you can discard a flux token to re-roll it. So you've got a 31% chance of just being like, if you're just chasing a 6, 31% chance of just going, yeah, but actually, I don't feel like taking lethal hits from your silence unit today, or anything in that mode. It is an insanely strange stratagem. It is specifically fight phase only. Apologies, it doesn't work in shooting, but the ability to just say, I'm not getting lethal hits by an Inner Circle Companion squad or anything of that mode is genuinely really weird. I call it scam potential. I don't know if it's a stratagem I would like to use all the time. It is mostly just conditional -1 to hit, but it does have a little bit of interaction outside. So as far as units that I think are interesting for this attachment, we have Lords of Change, Flamers, Screamers, and Demon Princes. Lord of Change is just generally pretty solid. It's got a good gun. It benefits from its buff. I only have one in the list. Like it's only okay. The first one with Infernal Puppeteer is good for like controlling the board, keeping your shooting going, and not indirecting. The second one is like a little bit vulnerable to just kind of standing in the open. And between like Kairos and the Lord of Change, it's quite easy to just keep both of them pretty safe until the mid game, and then kind of play a little more explosive with them, or teleport them and just keep their shooting active. While the Soul Grinders use their 3-up save and toughness 11 to keep them alive a little more actively. I think the Screamers are just a really good data sheet. They got buffed up to weapon skill 3 and having anti-vehicle anti-monster 4+, which means now with their for 85 points, you have a movement 14 beast model that can go through walls and charge vehicles and hold them up and tag them and just kind of cause problems. And then is 9 wounds with a 4 vulnerable save. Just again, the right kind of annoying to make your opponent have to play an awkward type of game against you, which I think is the exact kind of thing you're looking for in a Tzeentch army. They just make your opponent play the game with you a little more actively because you can actually charge them and threaten them with some stuff. And then I think the Demon Prince with the Never Blade, it gives him +1 to hit, it gives him +2 strength, and it gives him plus 2 armor plus 2 strength, plus 1 attack, and plus 1 armor penetration, and then also plus 1 to hit, which doesn't super matter, but does cancel out any other -1s. The Demon Prince with wings has like some genuinely really solid abilities. He gets to once per game get +3 attacks, and then also when he can pick lethal, sustained, or precision every time he fights, and then he's going to go in with that, and he's going to have 7 attacks, which can then push to 10 at 10-3-3, which is just a really solid little melee profile for an army that doesn't have a ton of melee. You can pick it up. He's got 4 vulnerable save, 10 wounds, toughness 9, like a rhino with a 4 vulnerable save, and then like 6 okay-ish shots in shooting is never something you're going to be too upset about. You could also do the one without wings, but I think generally I like being movement 12, and I think Demon Prince is like pretty good with that enhancement. Again, that could be something else. You could definitely run the double flux tokens enhancement, that kind of thing, but interesting options. So to kind of run through the list, we have Fate Weaver, Lord of Change with Infernal Puppeteer, Demon Prince of Chaos with wings with Neverblade, 2 squads of Pink Horrors, just a great unit for gubbing up the board, causing your opponent problems. You can pick them up, throw them about, and then they're a really good option to use for Infernal Puppeteer because you can point at one of them that's within 9 of you, and then use line of sight from one that's all the way at the front of the squad because it's a unit with a 9 model in that unit. It doesn't have to be a model with a 9, so you can fire the Lord of Change really far away. 3 squads of 6 flamers. They have fallback and shoot. They are just good guns. There's a +1 strength and shooting stratagem that can become +2 strength if you want. So you can have strength 7 AP2 flamers, really solid screamers, and then 2 Zinch soulgrinders as discussed for being really solid with flux tokens. Okay, next we have Blood Legion. Blood Legion has a restrictive reactive move, which is one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. It's basically when your opponent moves within 9 of you, 1 unit can Blood Surge per move. So you are very capable of getting in your opponent's face really quickly. If your opponent wants to try to walk on objectives or get engaged in the game, you just like can cause them to get in, can cause them to just like be in combat now, right? It's quite hard to pressure objectives. You're not gonna flip objectives with walking onto them against Khorne. Now, the interesting thing there as well is they have not sticky objectives, but gory objectives. If you kill something on an objective, it's sticky now until your opponent takes it off you. And if you're threatening a blood surge against anything that wants to walk on that objective, well, that's genuinely causing problems, right? How do you walk onto an objective against a squad of 6 blood crushers? Well, you don't. You shoot them off, okay, but then it's sticky, so you don't actually take it off them. So you kind of have to have fire and fade or charge them, and that's then introducing you're charging your Khorne army. Like, is that really where you want to be in life? Khorne has very rarely had issues with dealing damage, right? You have the Rendmaster on Bloodthrone. You have a +1 to hit aura from the Bloodthirster. Scarbrand has a +1 attack aura. Like, Khorne's damage output has never really been the problem. Getting in the fight has been. You're often a lot of like throw 6-inch charge and hope for the best with +1. But I had to 6-inch drop I had to like 3-inch drop my Bloodthirster to do it, or get lucky with where I was on the board. Now you're just advancing charging with going through walls, and that's a really great combination to have access to for getting blood crushers or anything else across the board. There's a +2 to charge stratagem as well, or +2 charge enhancement, sorry, which again I don't have in my build, but I would like to see on a Bloodthirster, or potentially the what's the guy? I think it's a Skullmaster, the one that joins the Blood Crusher unit that's really awkward because he makes it a 7 model unit for coherency, which is an absolute nightmare. Don't have that. Could definitely run it. Wouldn't be terrible. But yeah, overall, still having access to an advanced charge stratagem, having access to grenade stratagem in Demons is not super common. You've got a 3-up armor save stratagem to make sure that your units don't just get like randomly nuked out by AP0 or AP1 guns, because you can be in cover. You can keep a Bloodthirster unit alive a little more aggressively, or a Blood Crusher unit. And then you've also got a not unreasonable fight on death. It is just on 4s, unfortunately, but it's still the kind of thing that you didn't have access to otherwise, and that you'll never be upset about. Enhancement wise, yeah. So detachment data sheet wise, we have Bloodthirster. I think the first Bloodthirster is really good. There's an enhancement for reroll hit and wound. You take D3+1 mortal wounds, but come on, what are we doing? You run the big axe. Your D6+2 damage. You reroll hits and wounds, and you hit on 2s almost all the time, because even if you're degraded, you still hit on 2s. It's the kind of thing I want to whack my opponent across the head with a rapid ingress or advanced charging across the board. Very cool. I think the Bloodthirster is great. Skulltaker gets not a ton of his stature, but he does appreciate having access to just being able to advance and charge, giving out sticky objectives with units that have OC, and the Blood Surge move is quite good for him as well. He has devastating wounds. He gives his squad devastating wounds. Just I like Skulltaker in general, and I wanted to shout him out. I think he is one of the more interesting detachments. I think you could definitely skip him, but I like him. Rendmaster on Bloodthrone didn't have space for that on the word. +1 to strength, AP, and damage is such an insane amount of buff to hand out to anything that you can see. Anything within 18 that you can see. Strength, AP, and damage. And healing on the datasheet and genuinely good combat, pushing Flesh Hounds to damage 2 or damage 3 if you stack 2 of them. Bloodletters up to damage 4. Like it solves the problem of damage that Khorne already didn't really have, but then adds the level of like you're actually just like doing insane damage now. And then Blood Crushers are probably the best attachment in Khorne. The best data sheet in Khorne and best in this attachment. Advance and Charge is great for them. They're less reliant on playing on the board or rapid ingressing with their big models. They're great at using their mortal wounds. They already have Lance, so you're not as locked into playing the Lance aura. They really like Red Masters, and they really like sticky objectives because they don't want to stay on an objective. Like one of the bigger problems is you clear an objective with Blood Crushers and then they leave with the teleport stratagem, and that objective is not yours anymore. They didn't stick around in your command phase to sticky it. Well, sticky it by charging them. All right, let's have a quick look at the list. So I have a Bloodthirster with Fury Unbound, which is the rerolls. I have a Renmaster, one of which has Brazen Maw, which is the +2 to charge one. Just I had 15 points. It might as well go on something. There are, it'd be interesting to try to find the 25 points for Slaughterthirst to give you an aura of Lance for non-vehicle monsters. It would definitely help with like Flesh Hounds and Blood Crushers damage output a little bit. It's the kind of thing that it would be interesting to see. Maybe do it over the Nurglings, but I like Nurglings. Skull Taker with 2 squads of Bloodletters, just chaff, scoring, charging. You've got to stand something on objectives eventually, and they hit pretty hard, and they're not that expensive. It feels like I'm lying when I say that, but they're not that expensive for their damage output, just for their durability. 3 squads of Blood Crushers. I think they're the best unit in Khorne. They do insane damage. They really benefit from the Red Master buff. Just having 7 attacks to buff with +1 strength, AB, and damage is a lot. Flesh Hounds, skirmish units benefit from the Red Master. Can't hold objectives in a pinch. Don't hate advance and charge. And then someone's got to stand on your home objective. This army doesn't have like soul grinders or a lot of change with indirect to go and sit back there. So a squad of Playbearers to sticky, a squad of Nurglings to screen. Just you've got to respect your backfield. I would really like this to be something else, but there just isn't a ton. You could play Skull Cannons, but the Skull Cannon is just such an underwhelming data sheet in general, and it doesn't apply the sticky. The sticky has to be from melee. So I'm not a huge fan of it. It just doesn't do a ton here. All right, last up we have Plague Legion, which is the Nurgle one. It has Battle Shock mechanic as its army rule. It picks everything within 9 is in shadow, and you pick one thing in shadow to take a Battle Shock. It's not a great army rule. Losing access to all of the generic real space. What is the Demon's Detachment called? I actually have no idea off the top of my head. Demonic Incursion. Losing all the Demonic Incursion rules is going to be rough for demons. For Nurgle specifically, they really benefit from the up-down stratagem. They really benefit from the Endless Gift enhancement, and they really, really like the 6-inch Deep Strike. And none of those things are here for Chaos Demons or Nurgle. Now you can get a critical 5 stratagem to help your DPS, get your lethal hits going. You don't need Be'lakor because there's an enhancement that replicates him. It's probably the best for not needing Be'lakor. And there is an enhancement for +1 AP and an aura, which is specifically not only for ranged attack, or not only for melee, it does apply to ranged attacks, which is why I think the version that I went for here is the only one that felt okay. It gives friendly Legion Demonica Nurgles units within 6 +1 AP. So I went for Triple Soul Grinder because they have decent indirect, then you push to AP2. You've got Plague Drones, which have a decent little swing attack and a lot of attacks, benefit quite a bit from the +1 AP, give you wound rerolls, just help you with converting damage in an army that doesn't have a ton of it. Great and Clean One gives it a 6 of Pain Aura. Rodigus gives you some half OC, just like keeps you playing the game. The stratagems just aren't great. There's Battle Shocks, 1-2 CP to return models to the unit. Being able to bring back D3 Nurglings is genuinely almost okay. But for 2 CP, it's just not worth it. You can go through walls, great. Add 5 to infantry movement. Just none of your infantry does anything. What are we doing? Like you're going to run a couple squads of Plague Bearers, and maybe you'll use it on turn 5 to sneak an objective when you advance. But it's just not all that interesting because you can't even advance doing it. It's just instead of advancing, add +5 to your move, right? So if 5 gets you onto an objective on turn 5, great. But if you needed a 6, you still got to advance. You just got to roll the 6 naturally. So you got to be quite prescient with that. And then there's some more Battle Shock mechanics. It's not that great. Nothing in here that's overly compelling. I think the most interesting thing for me is the Soul Grinder with the +1 AP, and the Nurgle Soul Grinder's gun is just like it's 7 1 2 d6 +1 shots blast indirect. Like it's fine, but it's not the best gun to stick +2 AP on. The Harvester Cannon is okay. Like yeah, not all that impressed with it. But so here we have the quick. Oh, there we go. Apparently, I just never put the list in for Nurgle. Well, that's probably for the best. I'm going to very quickly go and find that and then read it out, because apparently I just deleted it. Apologies, I will be 1 second. Okay, so I believe it was Rotigus, a great and clean one with the plus with the Be'lakor aura. It was a Demon Prince with the +1 AP aura. It was 3 squads of Plague Drones, 1 Beast, 2 squads of Plague Bearers, 2 Nurglings, and 3 Soul Grinders. And that sounds correct off the top of my head. I do not have it in front of me to double check because I did not build a new recruit. But yeah, I was not all that impressed with it. It didn't feel like it was really doing anything particularly interesting. And losing out on Endless Gift, it just play if you want to play pure Nurgle, play it as Demonic Incursion. It is just better. Nothing this detachment is doing is better than 6-inch Deep Strike and the Endless Gift enhancement and being able to pick up great and clean ones. So yeah, apologies to Plague Legion fans, but I don't have anything really here for you. Now let's quickly touch on word detachments. So I've color coded them for our convenience. So Nurgle, I have it down here. I think it is more interesting and more powerful than like the Eldar or the Thousand Suns ones. It's definitely like there are some things you can do. The aura enhancement for +1 AP is like does help with damage output and is genuinely a powerful enhancement. And the 18-inch loan up from coming out of a Great and Clean One's base, meaning you don't have to run Be'lakor, is also quite interesting, right? The Great and Clean One has a lot of base coverage. Having unshootable +1 AP Soul Grinders is kind of cool. Like I don't hate it. It doesn't feel like it's viable, but it is kind of cool. And for me, that puts it like top of who is this for. I don't think anyone is really going to play it, but if you had to, that's where I would be going. Khorne and Slaanesh, Khorne and Tzeentch, I have basically next to each other at powerful enough that they'll probably see tournament play. Definitely interesting. I think Tzeentch just picked it out for me as being like more compelling. Um, the Infernal Puppet thing with the Lord of Change, the rerolls mechanic, the really, really good version of the up-down stratagem, just very, very cool and very, very powerful and gives me some really interesting options. You're still kind of pigeonholed into like you're playing Tzeentch detachments, Tzeentch day sheets that don't do a ton. Your melee is not incredible, but you've got enough to keep you honest. Is it going to handle playing against the best of the metagame? I would love to play against that with my Gene Circle. I can't imagine it being much of a game. But maybe I'll be wrong there. And the same kind of thing applies to the Khorne. Very one-dimensional, very monophasal, but really good at what it does. Blood Crushers are really good. They cause a ton of damage, but you're just playing around them, right? You don't have an up-down, so you're very much playing on the board with that army, and ultimately that is inherently fairly limited. And then Slaanesh, I think, genuinely kind of slams. I think realistically, I'd like to have it like here, right? Like somewhere in this squadron. I don't think it's necessarily quite as bad, but I didn't want to put it, but I think it's interesting and didn't want to put it down here. So I'm putting it up here because it's my tier list and I can do what I want. I think full reroll to wound keepers is fantastic. I think the stratagem to make your soul grinders randomly be really scammy to your opponent is really cool. Just genuinely a really, really compelling attachment that has a bunch of options, bunch of power, and opens up it feels weird to call it a new way to play demons because triple keeper has been a thing before, but it's not really been a thing in like modern times and without playing like anything else. And then running it with like soul grinders and things like that is very different to me. I really like the appeal of it, and it has such a unique playstyle of giving your opponent a benefit to gain one yourself. And the Tzeentch attachment does kind of the same, which is why I have both of them fairly high in terms of interest. It just gives you a lot of agency in how you want to play the game and how you want to interact with your opponent, and then having good defensive tools. I think maybe fit Be'lakor into that list to stop yourself getting scanning and shooting, put a squad of play bears in, and go to town, play that game, have a good time. We're going to be testing that out for some internal scrims at the moment because I think it's really interesting. I think it's really powerful, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. All right, last up, we have Hearthband for Votann. This detachment basically gives you reroll ones to hit and then +1 AP for a bunch of infantry stuff, like basically any unit that's being led by a call or your Hearthguard units. You've got a 6-inch piling consolidation stratagem, which is great. You have reroll ones to hit against the closest target, which really helps consistency in an army that has a bunch of sustained hits. The amount of times that you'll roll like a 1 to hit on your sustained hits D3 gun and then reroll it into a 6, you'll feel like God. That'll be incredibly cool. It helps with like land fortresses and Sagittars and all this kind of thing with like applying a ton of pressure and just being 17% more reliable. And that's never going to be bad. The problem with it is you don't have a ton of tokens. You're only going to be able to hand out tokens through units dying and through the calls, like looking at them. there's no other token interaction in this detachment at all, which really hampers your ability to get on the board early with tokens. And I don't think it's worth playing like 3 squads of bikes, 3 squads of Jaegers to go and like accelerate the pace of the game a ton to get your opponent started on having those tokens. I think they're just kind of a thing that you'll basically be hitting on 4s or rolling 1s until mid game, at which point you'll start switching to 3s or rolling 1s, and then it'll feel a lot better, but it will not turn on until mid game. You're going to have more of a slow ramp with this detachment rather than an explosive start of 4 like you would in Oathband. The +1 damage strat is quite good. Being able to push your Terminators to damage 3 really helps in the meta game where things like Possessed are likely to be around, and Biosanctic Aberrants and all that kind of thing. And being able to push Berserks to damage 4 does, with reroll ones to hit, does help in a pinch, right? Like that unit is very capable of split firing and killing the ever-living hell out of 2 vehicles at that point. Is it as good as +2 AP in combat? Debatable, but it's definitely not irrelevant compared to that. And then AOC got nerfed anyway, so does it matter that you don't have it? Yeah, but there's a 4 vulnerable save strategy for the Terminators anyway, so it'll be fine. Chthonian Berserks are probably the data sheet that the most headlines this for me. Reroll ones to wound reroll ones to hit is great for that data sheet. Big fan. They go in land forts, push them forward, play Tim Schneider's list. You'll not be upset. Einherjar Hearthguard, get their +1 AP. You can run the Volkite or the Plasma. I think probably still run the Volkite, but +1 AP on the incidental guns that come out of that is pretty solid. And then pushing the Plasma up in AP is pretty good as well. Not having access to Grim Demeanor for ignore modifiers makes me a little less appeal on the Plasma for the Hearthguard, because you're going to bounce to -1 damage a decent amount across things like Telamon Dreadnoughts or Magnus, right? Like those kind of things where it'd be nice to have the no modifiers rather than +1 AP, but it's never that bad. Sagittars, love the rerolls. Having 5 guns with 5 shots with sustained hits, having reroll 1s just makes it that little bit more likely that you can spike into that 6 to really push that damage on your opponent. And Harnkin Pioneers have a lot of shooting. They like getting up close. I don't have a ton in the list that I wrote for this one because there's only so many things you can fit in Votann. Like the units are fairly expensive and the points don't always work out super clean. But Harnkin Pioneers, like big 6-man, get up close, shoot the hell out of something, teleport somewhere else, do it again, is not a bad way to approach the game. Not having the sustained hit stratagem really hurts their damage output, which is why I didn't super hard into them, but they're the kind of unit that I could see really liking this detachment if you wanted to go harder into them than I have. So for the list, I've gone for a call with the Bastion Shield, which is armor contempt against shooting attacks within 12. It's a completely reasonable thing to have if you're playing like danger close with them. It stops you just getting shot off the table by somebody running at you, and because it's an armor enhancement, not a stratagem, it does apply for the entire phase. We've got 10 Hearthkin Warriors. They'll be getting split up by Sagittars. 10-10-5 of Chthonian Berserk because they do the best damage. They're the most consistent, just like make something go dead. 2 squads will be inside Hecaton Land Fortresses. 1 will be inside the Sagittar. 10 Hearthguard with to join the call. 10 Jaeger for early game pressure to give you scout space for your Sagittars, and then a 3 of Harnkin Pioneer for some scoring and teleporting about. I don't think this is amazing. I think there's definitely probably a better like general concept for Hearthband, but for the time being, I would just play Oathband. Nothing in here really makes me say I would really like to be playing this over it. The 6 Palette Consolidation strategy is the only thing that really has me going like maybe there's a world where that's annoying enough, and that mobility for an army that is generally fairly slow does give you like some actual direction that you can take it in. I wish calls were better. Being able to, because they're the only way to hand out tokens, being able to have like 2 or 3 calls standing about in like 5-man Hearthguard squads might be a way to approach it. You could put like 3 of them on the table, chuck that out, but like I don't know, man. It seems like you're jumping through a lot of hoops for not that good a buff. And then yeah, where do I have Hearthband? I have it down here. I don't think it's particularly bad. I think it's just kind of doing the same thing Oathband did because Votann don't have a ton of data sheets. There's not a lot of diversity in their builds, and this one doesn't have an interaction with their army mechanic, so it just kind of feels a bit bleh. It's the same data sheets doing the same things with different buffs. Is it bad? No, I don't think objectively it's very bad. It's got 16 Pilot Consolidate, it's got a real ones to hit, it's got all those kind of things. But I think, for me, like Oathband is probably sitting somewhere in this region, and it just compares more favorably to Votann. So yeah, overall, I think we kind of, if we're looking at the new ones for this week, we have these two, these two, these two. So two in each of the like other quadrants, and then so like 2 in Fun But Flawed with the two knights attached with Kiss Knights Imperial Knights, 2 in Who Is This For with Nurgle and Eldar, 2 in Same Options New Packaging with Creations of Bile and Votann, and then in Powerful and Compelling we have joining the other ones we have Tzeentch, Khorne, Drukhari, Librarius, Conclave Space Marines, Slaanesh, Orcs, Grey Knights, and a Guard, which for me is still a really good hit rate. Like I would consider everything that's not in this box a passing grade. And this is like not far off of being a passing grade. I feel like it's one good stratagem away from having been a passing grade for me. Which like isn't super far off, right? Like there's only really one or two misses so far, like real misses with Thousand Sons and Eldari for me. And we know Eldar is getting a book soon, so there's always a world. And this one, if you're being honest, reads like it's written for a new Thousand Sons book that doesn't have brutal ones to hit and wound everywhere and plus one to wound everywhere, right? Like because that's what it gives out. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they continue to come out with over the next week. And I should be back. I am hoping to record on the 24th for the last attachment, but it may be for the last attachment, but it may be the 26th after we get through the Christmas New Year's period, the Christmas period. But I will be back for week 3 soon. If you enjoyed and you want to hear more from us, you can check out stat-check.com, where you can see everything that we're doing, whether that's the metadata dashboard, the articles, or coaching, or anything in between. If you would like to hear more from us talking Warhammer every week, that's youtube.com/statcheck at 11 p.m. UK time, 6 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday. We go through events, we go through our personal weeks and anything interesting that's been happening in the game, as well as taking our listener questions. If you'd like to support us doing more of this content, you can check out patreon.com/statcheck or use the YouTube membership program that's linked down below. And if you're not in a position to do any of those things, please do leave a like, a comment, or subscribe to the YouTube video. It really helps us out with discoverability, making sure we're able to continue bringing you all of these cool things, which we hope that you are enjoying. Lastly, if you want to hear more from me specifically, more in depth on any of these attachments or anything else that's come out over Grotmas, or you'd like to work with any of the other coaches on StatCheck, you can check out stat-check.com/coaching or drop us an email at coaching@stat-check.com. We would be more than happy to help you out with anything that you're looking to grow on as a player in terms of 40k. We are coming up for a very busy period with Nottingham and LVO, so I'm really looking forward to diving into the nitty-gritty of the tournament scene with a whole bunch of new people. So yeah, drop me a message if that's something that sounds interesting to you. Otherwise, I believe that's all I have. So thank you to everybody for being with me. I will catch you all sometime in the next 10 days for week 3 of Grotmas. And I hope you all have a wonderful time. And I hope your Grotmas detachment is incredible. Gene Cult is tomorrow, and I cannot wait. I'm really, really, truly hopeful that it's something interesting that I can consider taking to LVO. But if it's not that, I want it to be Crossfire, if I'm being honest. They just put it in the White Dwarf Crusade rules, and I'm very upset that that's not our detachment. So we'll see what happens. But thank you, and goodbye.